Well, and that's a great segue into Aerosmith
Yeah.
because I'm gonna lay all the cards on the table here. Famously on this podcast, and I don't think Josh and I as much fall in a hard opinion take on this, but Matt will often name Aerosmith as one of his least favorite bands in
Hmm.
conversations with us. That's why it's so interesting to be covering an Aerosmith album without Matt here. There's going to be a couple times where I hearken back to Matt without him being here as well. So I'll be projecting
Yeah.
towards his opinions or stuff, but
Hmm.
with at least some knowledge of having known him for a long time. But we're going to let him get the final say when he does return. So, did you, Josh, before I give a little bio here, did you have a relationship with Aerosmith in your mind?
Yeah. Their videos were kind of, their music videos with Alicia Silverstone always stood out. I
Hmm.
always really hated the song from Armageddon that they
Hmm.
did, uh, as well as the movie Armageddon. So that didn't help things. And
Hmm.
then I don't know. I just always felt like they were, well, I always felt like they were just kind of music for the masses in maybe a snobby way,
Okay.
and or rock for the masses, I should say, and never really found them appealing in any way.
Heading into this.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I always look at Aerosmith as like three different bands. There's like the 70s like lean kind of edgy blues
Yeah.
rock band, and then there's comeback Aerosmith that's defined by just Steven Tyler and tassels and huge videos, kind of
Hmm.
like 80s glitz and polish, and then there's like 90s Aerosmith where they're like basically screw it, we're going for the broadest sound possible, right? Like, and we're
Right.
going to kind of leave the edge of the door, and we're going to be like your friendly neighborhood band, kind of like what the Foo Fighters uh
Yes.
went into, but we are not, in my opinion, we are not at that era of Aerosmith yet when Pump is coming out.
Hmm.
I'll be curious to hear your take, but here's a little bit of info on Pump. Pump is actually the 10th studio album by Aerosmith,
Jeez.
released September 12th, 1989, and peaked at number 5 on the charts. It is so there was the original Aerosmith lineup, and then two members left the band. Not Steven Tyler, but the other two Joe Perry left, and oh gosh, why am I? Oh my gosh, I'm like very embarrassed now. I think it was Brad Whitford, the other guitarist. He left
Okay.
as well. So the guitarists both left, and I'll double check myself just to make sure, but I know it wasn't Tyler or the drummer, Joey Kramer. So I
Hmm.
probably should mention that this is the classic Aerosmith lineup with Steven Tyler on vocals. I think he also plays the keyboards in the band. Joe
Oh,
Perry as the guitarist, Brad Whitford as the usually the second guitarist, but he does play some lead. Tom Hamilton on bass and Joey Kramer on drums and a bunch of additional personnel. So that is kind of the band that's playing right here. Kind of they famously lived a hard life in the 70s, and
hmm.
almost all of them were battling addiction in some way or another. So they break up as a band, they get back together and release kind of like a comeback album that sort of like, well, they're getting along again, but I think they're kind of like past their prime. And then the Run DMC thing happens, Permanent Vacation happens. They bring in Desmond Child, right, and all those folks to polish things up. We've already seen Desmond Child a couple times before,
Hmm.
and I'll make mention of him, most notably in the Def Leppard album we covered. But yeah, this is sort of after that one sells a ton. This one comes out, and this one sells even more. And this album is often the last piece I'll put in is they kind of wanted to make what Permanent Vacation was doing, which was commercial, with
Hmm.
a rawness of what 70s Aerosmith was.
Yeah.
Um, and I got to tell you, Josh, I'll kind of go into my take right here. I think they succeeded. And I don't know if I had preconceived notions of Aerosmith not being good or anything, because I have gone on the podcast and mentioned the 70s Aerosmith I like quite a bit.
Hmm.
Um, but this album, almost all of the comeback Aerosmith songs I really like are on this album. And I realized that like Get a Grip is not an album I historically love. That's
Hmm.
where you said the Alicia Silverstone songs, and Amazing and Crying and
Yep.
stuff. Not really as much for me. Later, I think it's like late 90s that Armageddon song comes. They had the
Yep.
Pink, right? Pink is my favorite color, and just there's a lot of different songs, in the 90s, and
Hmm.
that's not really for me. And I think of the 80s, and the stuff on Permanent Vacation is not as much something I like. It's like, oh, it's good. The Aerosmith's basically a hair band now, but you know,
Yeah.
I don't really love it. This one, on the other hand, I felt was a much more rugged and enjoyable album. I mean, the it's kind of back to like 70s Aerosmith. The double entendres are flying everywhere. They're
They
lean.
are
There's good.
a mile a minute. It
They
seems
are a
like.
mile a minute. Yeah, I mean, basically, Steven Tyler is just, if he's not double, innuendo or double entendre and stuff, he's like triple entendre and like super innuendo. Yeah.
Hmm.
But I shouldn't say every song, because Janie's Got a Gun is a pretty serious song.
Yeah.
In
Hmm.
terms of the content material there about abuse and domestic violence. Could be applied to either. The video certainly implies that it's about childhood abuse. It's a
Hmm.
very famous video, but and one I remember as a kid quite markedly. But I was very impressed by especially the first half of this album. Songs like "Young Lust" and "Fine,"
Hmm.
"Monkey on My Back." They're classic Aerosmith. They are more polished, and you could tell they still have the Permanent Vacation team around, and they don't go as gritty blues, right? Like embracing the blues rock era as fully
Hmm.
as stuff on Toys in the Attic and Rocks and all the various um, 70s Aerosmith albums.
Yep.
There's others, obviously, besides just the two most famous ones. But, and outside of those two albums, you have like the earlier stuff that has, Mamakin and stuff like that on it, which is a great song. But yeah, in many ways, it's interesting they come back and get to make what it takes, right? Like a ballad, which I enjoy at the end of it, because they kind of did the first power ballad in Dream On way back
Hmm.
when in the early 70s. So if anybody gets to make a power ballad, it's Aerosmith, since they sort of created the genre and it got appropriated certainly in the 80s. But my first take, Josh, before I turn it over to you, was I was surprised how much I liked this album, especially the first six tracks really spoke to me. And I was surprised by how much grit they were packing, because I didn't feel Permanent Vacation had any of this grit. And I guess in my mind had that the band after the comeback was just a completely different beast that didn't in any way resemble the 70s band. But this one felt like one of their 70s albums.
Interesting. Yeah, you were higher on this album than I am,
Okay.
and the I I tried to not bring those preconceived notions of the band into this, but unfortunately, it seemed like this album just kind of reinforced what I thought about them already.
Interesting.
They're decidedly blues rock. It is remarkable that this is their 10th album, that they've been around at this point. In '89, that long. That's
Yeah, we're looking
commendable.
at like 17 years at this
Yeah.
point. And remember, they still have like another decade plus career of
Right.
being, I mean, because that Armageddon song was 99-ish, I think, around 98, 99.
Hmm.
So that's going to be a full 10 years after this.
Yeah. So I think with the my criticism's kind of twofold. One, I think that their kind of blues rock uh, musicality and kind of underpinnings just doesn't work enough for me, and it's not blues enough for me, and it doesn't seem as interesting in kind of pursuing the blues as some other bands. I think it's just the rock itself is not. It just feels very derivative and to mass appeal for me, even at this stage. I mean, I don't know the Permanent Vacation album, so I can't really compare it to that, but I find that the they're just there's something here that's lacking in terms of I don't want to say edge, but there's a lack of uh, um, personality in this music to me. I mean, granted, like you said, there's a lot of double entendres and there's a tongue-in-cheek nature to this band, but it seems a bit like try hard to me in the way that they do it.
I know what you're saying. I felt that way about Permanent Vacation. The songs you'd probably know from that one are like Ragdoll, Dude Looks Like a Lady, Angel, right? Those are the big hits off that one. And that, I know what you're saying, because sometimes I feel like that feels a little try hard for me.
Yeah. And I think at this stage in 89 too, this band just doesn't compare to other rock bands that are out right now. And I think music as a whole, you know, in the different genres that we've seen, the different bands that we've talked about.
Do you think even in their chosen genre, like, because they're clearly trying to compete in like the hair metal realm,
right?
Like, do you think it's lesser than the other hair metal that we've listened to?
Yes, I think so. I think that's part of the problem too. I mean, if you know, when you have Guns N' Roses kind of the gold standard for what you can do with a band, and granted, their Guns N' Roses is still in the same like musical genre as this band. It's just infinitely more interesting to me. And it's almost like Aerosmith at this point. It's almost like a watered down version of probably who they were in the 70s even. I just don't feel like they have, you know, we always talk about a band having edge, and this feels like an edge that has been you know, shaved down or run down a lot, and it's just more, I don't know, maybe easier, maybe it's just, what am I trying to say, it's like it's kind of like entry level hair metal, maybe, again, in the way that we've talked about some
entry
of those
level.
other bands.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I just don't find it engaging enough, this album, or and sometimes it just leaves me like questioning kind of their motivations as well. You know, on tracks like Dulcimer Stomp / The Other Side and Hoodoo / Voodoo Medicine Man, I don't even know why they feel the need to kind of put that preamble in. That's clearly seeming like a play on like Led Zeppelin or something like that. And you know, that's kind of the perfect comparison. Like, I don't want to feel like listening to an album that I'd rather that there's other bands that do it better, or that a band that's 20 years old at this point, like Led Zeppelin, is just superior in every way to a band. You know, it's like
well, they do describe a little bit of what the interludes were designed to do. It doesn't sound like it was successful for you. They brought in a musician, Randy Rain Rush, or Reusch, Reusch. Okay. He was brought into the studio because they decided to kind of shake up the rules a little bit, Steven Tyler and Joe Perry, and they went to his house for unusual instruments to use, and I guess that led to them having him do these interludes to display different sounds, I guess was the thought. I think also what's funny, after this, Wikipedia does mention many of the lyrics employ sexual themes, which Tyler attributed to having making up for lost time he spent using drugs instead of having sex in the 70s.
My God. Yeah, I think in terms of lyrical content, you know, they're not reinventing the rainbow. I do think Janie's Got a Gun is a successful song to me. I think it's interesting that they're commenting on domestic violence. I kind of like the grand feel of that song. You know, they incorporate some strings. It's definitely got a dark tone to it, which I think is effective. But the rest of the, you know, kind of opening tracks, the double entendres and kind of the sexual innuendo and everything works for a while, but then it kind of wears on me and feels it wears out its welcome.
It's interesting because I know you didn't dislike the Bon Jovi and Def Leppard albums we covered, and I find this to be a better version of that type of album. Yeah. I think the songs are better. maybe not better than the hits on Slippery When Wet, but those other albums felt very disposable to me.
Hmm.
I This didn't feel as much that way because I always take Aerosmith as tongue in cheek, but it's
Right.
funny because it feels like the whole band is tongue in cheek, but you can't tell with Steven Tyler because it may be true with him specifically. So that always made me laugh kind of about him. Now, I should also mention at this band, when this is released, Steven Tyler's 41
Yeah.
and Joe Perry's 39. So it's just an interesting like age, right? We don't cover a lot of bands who are at the top of the charts who are 41 and 39 in the contemporary charts, by the way,
Right.
MTV, because the think of like the Traveling Wilburys, right? Who are at this time, they were viewed as like music
Yes.
for old people, right? And they're not
Exactly.
even that much older, right? Than Aerosmith is, who I have to admit was considered to be like music that young people and teenagers were listening to all the way through the mid 90s, which is
Hmm.
kind of remarkable when you think about it, because by the mid, by 93 when Get a Grip's coming out, like they're in their mid 40s and still producing,
Yeah.
videos. So that's a fascinating thing. But I think where for my taste, is different. I do think this is a step up
Hmm.
from like the polished metal. I don't really consider them to be direct competitors with Guns N' Roses, because Guns N' Roses is putting out to me an attempt to be more dangerous, whereas I think Aerosmith is going for more. It's certainly on this one like sexually hedonistic and
Yeah.
winky. There's nothing wink wink nod nod about Guns N' Roses at all. They're deathly serious. Now whether they're doing it or not is not there. That's why I consider them more like the hair bands, right? Because
Hmm.
it's sort of Motley Crue and Poison and stuff, that Def Leppard, they played a little bit less serious. And
Definitely.
yeah,
And
and
they,
so yeah.
yeah, I agree with you. I think all of those bands, Bon Jovi and Def Leppard that we talked about, I kind of put Aerosmith on that level. I do feel like this album is kind of disposable in some way. It's like
Hmm.
perfectly fine to listen to, but I think in terms of like musical talent and quality, it doesn't do enough interesting things for me. It doesn't seem, when you, personnel matters, and when you have somebody like Slash who's like a guitar virtuoso, that comes through in the music, at least for
Interesting.
me. And I
I
don't
don't
think
find the
that's
guitar generic on this album personally.
yeah.
In the way that it doesn't, it just seems really tight
Yeah.
is how I describe the guitar, like the three guitars on this album.
Right.
You're not getting big solos, like, and that's kind of the difference between them and Guns, right?
Yeah.
Like you've got three guitars there too, but Slash takes the lead all the time, where Perry's a little bit more restrained in terms of taking the lead, I'd say, which is in line with being a blues band, you
Yeah,
know?
that's true. Yeah, I mean, I think there's no question that they make make the music well. It's just that it's just not working for me
It
on
just
some
doesn't hit
level.
for you.
Yeah.
I gotcha. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just
Right.
I just say that I know Permanent Vacation, and I definitely know Get a Grip. And Permanent Vacation is, I would probably talk about it the same way I talked about like Pyromania, right? Or Slippery When
Yeah.
Wet. It feels like a very similar album to me. And Get a Grip just doesn't really hit my musical taste as much. And I love 70s Aerosmith. I really do. This one I was fully expecting to be two of three in that run of, Aerosmith Light, and I do think it was a step up from that. And I would almost put it as the last sort of classic Aerosmith album in terms of the sound they go for. I also think there's nothing about this album that is going to make Matt change his opinion on it,
No.
which is fascinating to me, because I think this goes to something that I don't think you and I have, but that Matt has, and I don't want to go too far. Like we've talked about how Matt, he says he's not influenced by who the artist is, but he has said he doesn't like Aerosmith, right? Especially 80s Aerosmith. But it's funny because he loves Def Leppard and he really likes Bon Jovi. And to me, I can't understand how you can like those two and not like this. Because like I said, I feel this is a better version of that. But it seems like you might fall in that camp too, where you like them but not this.
I don't think I necessarily like those bands more than this band, but
Okay.
I think they're all kind of doing the same kind of quality of music and wide appeal type of rock that just really kind of doesn't work for me.
Yeah, and I'm probably 3 of 3 on Guns N' Roses. I like Guns N' Roses quite a bit, but I don't kind of elevate them, I think, to the exalted status that I mean, I know you and Matt probably would have them in your top 10 of bands ever. Yeah, for sure. And I don't think they end up there for me. Yeah.
That would be an interesting top 10. I've never written down what that would be, but they'd probably be in the top 20 for sure.
Fair enough. So 1 up, 1 down on this one to start the show.